Chapter 6. And the Legion is. I exited out the room, fixing my hair as I made my way down the hall. I stared down the hall, wondering how Sam and Pete could have been so far ahead of me. I continued down the empty corridor, touching up my tux as I walked. I stalled as one of the doorknobs turned before opening. It wasn't one I recognized to be one of ours. It piqued my curiosity enough to cause me to slow my pace. I froze, anxious to see who or what would emerge. "Come on, Sean. Big shot. The second coming. Why do you always have to be such a stickler? Will you just wait? We're coming," said a voice as the door finally opened. "I'm not a stickler. I just try to make it to places before they're over," said a kid, speaking toward the room as he was exiting. "You know, like we're supposed to." I paused as a kid appeared. He appeared to be around my age. He didn't appear overly big or strange-looking, but he walked with a calm coolness reminiscent of Jacob. He had eyes that lacked emotion, and shoulder-length dark brown hair. He dressed in a tux similar to mine, albeit messier. He was smiling from ear to ear as he closed the door. That was until he caught sight of me. He gave an acknowledging nod. I paused for a second, then returned the gesture as he turned and headed toward the elevator. He walked a couple of steps before turning to me begrudgingly. "You're Timothy Eli, right?" he replied, pointing at me as if he just recognized who I was. I nodded cautiously. I was still a little skeptical about the people in the realm, but there was something about his mannerisms that was familiar to the Earth realm, so I had little reservations as he returned my gesture with a friendly smile. "Don't worry, man, I'm not trying to hassle you," he replied with a friendly chuckle. "It's just I know you. You know, the real you, or the Earth you, which is still the you I'm talking to now. Blah! I mean, I knew you when you were younger, back at Angel Haven Elementary in Angel Haven. We were in the same class. Mr. Haltz, first grade?" I was drawing a blank. I would have thought his face would be one I would remember. I racked my brain, searching frantically to remember who he was, but nothing came to mind. I paused before forcing an apologetic reply. "I don't really remember anyone before last year," I apologized. "So you're asking me to go a little outside of my limitations." He paused before scratching his cheek, frustrated, before perking up as if to be remembering something. "My family was wiped out in that home invasion about 4 years ago ER time," he replied, snapping his fingers, as he pointed, trying to jar my memory. "ER time?" I replied. "Oh, Earthrealm time," he replied apologetically. "Oh yeah," I responded, everything finally rushing back to me. It had been 4 years ago, as he said. I only remembered it because of how gruesome the crime scene was. The community was on high alert during the AARM killings. The mother and father in the horrendous assault were brutally murdered. The child's body wasn't found at the scene of the crime. There was a long search before they finally found it at the bottom of a lake. The decay made it impossible to determine a cause of death, but no one wanted to think of what the child must have endured, and there was no indication one way or another. So most people comforted themselves with the belief that he didn't suffer. My dad asked if I knew the kid. There were over 40 kids in my first grade class, and outside of Cy and Pete, I didn't know any of them. "Oh, wow," I uttered, unable to find any other words to say. I stared at him, trying to comprehend how he could talk about the situation so flippantly. It was odd. His face still lacked the level of reaction I would have expected from someone who had been involved in such an awful tragedy. His expression was uncomfortably emotionless. "I'm sorry," I replied, still unable to fully understand his demeanor. "Hey, it's cool. It was tough, but once you've been here for a while, you'll realize how much your mind rationalizes everything that happened in that world as a bad nightmare. Besides, it was quick and painless, which is more than I can say about a lot of people in this realm," he replied, finally showing a hint of sensitivity to the situation. Even though he sounded remorseful, his actions and gestures were still extremely cold and emotionless. I nodded while trying to figure out a way to proceed with the uncomfortably candid conversation. "Well, that's good to hear," I muttered. "Are you here for the trials?" "Yeah, it's really my dad's thing," he replied with a shrug. "We're Earthborns, you know, and as I'm sure you know by now, that comes with a lot of baggage. He's always pressing me to show them what an Earthborn can do. After a promise to let me chill for a couple centuries, I took him up on his offer, and here I am." "If I could only have died a regular death," I sighed sarcastically. He chuckled to himself. "I'm sorry, I forgot about your situation," he apologized with a smile. "No, it's okay," I replied nonchalantly. "I'll have an eternity to live how I want." "Well, for what it's worth, you should be higher heaven-bound when you get back," he replied. "Higher heaven-bound?" I pressed. "Oh, it's a term that is used in the heaven realm, which refers to the 7 heaven realms. This is the 7th heaven realm, which is reserved for Christians and those deemed righteous by God. Everything over that is reserved for prophets and holy monarchs. I don't really know much about what goes on in either of those realms, but I know people here work on their faith and righteousness to continue to move up through each realm, so my guess is it only gets better, but that would just be a guess." "Oh, well, cool," I replied, smiling to myself. In the midst of my reply, the door behind us began to shake. I wasn't eager to be hauled into another conversation, not to mention I was late as it was, so I decided to leave before anyone else appeared. "Look, it was nice to meet you and all, but I'm really running late," I replied, staring back at the door. "I have to get going." "Oh, no problem. I understand," he replied, extending his hand. "Good luck, and I'll see you later at the celebration." I returned his shake with a smile. It was cool to see such a down-to-earth guy. I had no idea people from this realm could be so normal. I headed toward the elevator. I hurried, unenthusiastic about the prospect of sharing my elevator ride with another Legion. As the door opened, I paused. The scene looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. A robotic-looking humanoid stood smiling as I entered. He wore a tux that was similar to the one I had on, aside from a company logo that was stitched on the breast pocket. His skin was pearly white, almost like he was a plastic doll, but it breathed like real skin and gave him the appearance of an emo. Outside of his robotic expression, it was hard to tell the difference between him and a regular human. "Mr. Eli, hi, I am Matthew Delta 412, he said as the doors closed behind me. "Hi," I responded, still unsure if I should be talking to the lifelike replica of a person. "I am your portal conductor. I will be facilitating your inter-hotel transporting during your stay," he continued, still smiling. His face was so robotic it made me uncomfortable. He stood with perfect posture as he turned to type in the coordinates. "Okay," I responded awkwardly. After typing the coordinates in, he turned his focus back to me. The smile slowly disappeared as his face returned to an expressionless scowl. "So, are you excited about this afternoon, Mr. Eli?" he replied, as the weird forced smile made its reappearance. If his personality wasn't so cold and robotic, I might have assumed he was trying to kill the awkward silence between us, but his vacant eyes assured me that wasn't the case. "I don't really know. What's going to happen today?" I replied. He paused before flashing his awkward smile again. "Well, I'm glad you asked. I would be more than happy to explain today's agenda," he replied, in a robotically energetic voice that was both creepy and scary at the same time. A part of me wished that Sam or Luke would have been present to address some of the bothersome mannerisms being exhibited by the robotic replica. I wasn't comfortable enough with confrontation to say anything myself. I just stood, trying to look it in the eye as it went on with its presentation. "It all starts at the trial banquet. They'll explain the competition and training week. From there, you'll be released to mingle at the pre-trial celebration tonight, which is generally a favorite for the candidates. But, of course, that is only after you have done your post-banquet press conference," he explained. I humored him, nodding, unable to get off that elevator fast enough. I almost leaped off it as the door opened. "Thanks, it was nice to meet you, Delta 412, I replied courteously. "It was my pleasure, Mr. Eli," he replied. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon." "Thanks," I replied, still trying to be courteous, even though the whole exchange was like being forced into a conversation with a smartphone. I forced a smile as the cameras snapped. I made my way through the lobby. It was a media frenzy. I trotted toward the meeting spot with a row of media paparazzi on each side of me. I waved and smiled, having gone through the dog and pony show during the Walk of Fame with my father more times than I could remember. I felt so unworthy of the attention I was receiving. I couldn't understand how they could have witnessed how inept I was, yet still be so enamored with me. The pressure was getting to me, and I was nervous they would soon find the Emperor had no clothes, and I would be exposed like always. "Tim, we're over here," Sai signaled, waving her hand in an ushering manner. She wore a beautiful evening gown that was white with gold trim. The white was so bright it reflected off her face, giving her beautiful blue eyes an attractive sparkle. Her silky black hair was up in a fancy style that accented her high cheekbones perfectly. "Okay," I responded, heading over to meet her and the rest of the Legion. "I hate this thing," Sam bellyached, fidgeting with his collar and tie. He looked so out of character in his suit. It fit him, but oddly still looked awkwardly small. I chuckled to myself. I was happy to see someone looked worse than I did. "Somebody knows how to clean up," Eve joked, tapping me on the shoulder. She, like Sai, wore a gown, but hers had a gold sash. As always, she looked beautiful. I smiled uncomfortably as we embraced each other in a hug. We hadn't seen each other in hours, but it seemed like days. I turned and greeted Sai, Danielle, and Beth with hugs as well. "So, where's Jacob, Luke, and Uriah?" I responded, surveying the lobby. "We don't know. The girls were here with Max and Jade when we arrived," Pete responded, pointing in the direction of Max and Jade as he spoke. "I see," a voice let out from behind us. I turned to see the twins walking, sucking down ice pops. They were decked in tuxedos as well. "Do you guys think it's a good idea to be eating those things in all white?" Beth objected like a worrying mother hen. "Oh, it's no problem," Zek replied, intentionally smearing the pop on his coat. "Watch this." With a flick of his index finger, the stain liquefied. The liquid traveled as if to be rewinding as it went from his shirt back to the ice pop. "See?" he replied with a smile. "No sweat." "Cool," Beth replied, nodding her head. "Legion Theta Delta," said a voice ringing from where Max and Jade were standing. "Will Legion Theta Delta please make their way to the banquet hall?" We all gave shrugging glances as we stared around the hotel like lost children looking for refuge. "Come on, Danielle, you've been here before, haven't you?" Luke screamed across the lobby, catching our attention. He, Jacob, and Uriah poured down the aisle that extended from the elevator. Luke gave one last lasting image, grabbing hold of Jacob before making his way over to us. "I love this place," he gushed. "I can't wait to show these stuffy necks how we do it on the blue planet." I stared at him and Jacob, unable to fathom how they could be so comfortable with all the pressure that was heaped on our Legion. But my guess was they were used to it. A life of overachieving will do that. I stood, twiddling my thumbs nervously as they were having the time of their life. "I have never been here, idiot," Danielle fired back. "This isn't a regular hotel. Only prospects are allowed to stay here. I'm just as oblivious as you guys are. I don't know anything." Luke raised his brow condescendingly as he, Jacob, and Uriah continued to greet the rest of us. "Will you guys come on?" Max ordered, agitated. "You should have entered the hall minutes ago. This is not Earth. Things are extremely punctual. You have to get going." "We don't know where we're supposed to go. We've never been here. Remember? I fired. Oh, yeah, sorry, he replied. But either way, let's get going. He hurried us as we made our way to a pair of open doors. The banquet hall was extremely elegant. It was as huge as a football stadium. We entered the opened doors and were surprised to see that we were on the top deck of the hall. I walked to the edge of the deck and peered over at the stadium floor. It was covered with rows of golden wood tables paired off into groups. As we entered the futuristic cathedral-like hall, we were ushered onto a floating platform. "Hello, Legion Theta Delta," said Delta 412. "Please watch your step as you board the platform, and stand clear of the edge. We have been waiting for your arrival." We all quickly boarded the hovering platform. The stadium-like hall was filled, brimming with screaming fans of all ages. As we hovered by them, they reached and screamed our names. There was even a section with huge signs that read, "Theta Delta, we love you!" I couldn't believe how loud it was. "This is insane," Pete said, struggling to speak. "Yeah, it's like the Super Bowl," Luke added. "It's awesome." "It's scary. All these people are all here just for us," Beth continued. "Well, not just for you. For the competition," Max replied. "As I said, there is nothing in the Heaven Realm that keeps the attention of the Quadrants like the Light Guard trials. It's a pride thing. You trial legions represent bloodlines, native homeworlds, tribes, and clan ties. It's extremely important to these people. You see the section that has the Theta Delta Legion signs? That is the Earthborn Native Quadrant. No legion comprised of this many Earthborn prospects have ever made it through on its first try. Normally, Earthborns aren't even taken seriously in this competition unless they've been here for at least a millennium. So you guys should know the expectations you guys have garnered is unlike anything they have ever seen." "No pressure," I added sarcastically. "Yeah, are Earthborns really that bad?" Pete continued. "I mean, weren't our parents Earthborn?" "Yes, it is true that your parents eventually became extraordinary remnants, but as a trial legion they were little more than average," Jade responded. "Outside of Leah and Adam, they weren't in your league as a trial legion. It took them nearly 3 tries, and they still barely got admitted by the skin of their teeth." "Wow, I thought you said we were from some crazy good hereditary line?" I asked, feeling like the rug had just been snatched from under me. "Well, you are. That doesn't mean they were always great," he responded. "Look at the leaps and bounds you guys have made in such a small period of time. You have no idea how powerful remnants can become over a lifespan. Not to mention the advantage of living in the Earth realm is not to be taken lightly either. You are forced to build strong faith in those types of circumstances. It may take Earthborns a while to get acclimated to this realm, but once you guys do, you'd be surprised at what your kind can do once their faith is affirmed." We stepped off of the platform into a crowded banquet hall. As always, we were the center of attention. We ushered into the lane. The eyes of thousands of legions were piercingly glaring at us as we made our way toward our seats. "Hi, nice to meet you. We're the Theta Delta Legion. Feel free to hate us," Eve whispered sarcastically. As we made our way down the painfully long aisle, I felt like I had a target on my back. It felt like the first day of school all over again. "Look at the superstars," said one voice from the crowd. "Yeah, let's all wait for the Elis," said another voice. "Silence!" screamed a voice from the front of the room. It was Abdiel. He was the same guy from the interview Jade had shown us when we first arrived. He sat with a group of men in the front of the banquet hall on an elevated stage. "Welcome, Theta Delta Legion," he said with a smile. "I apologize, gentlemen," Max replied. "I'm sorry for our tardiness, but I tend to forget that these guys don't know anything about the Heaven Realm. The tardiness will be excused on my merit." Max stepped aside as he spoke. We maneuvered around him and took our seats as he and Jade made their way to the front of our table. I prayed for the awkwardness to subside. "Of course they'll be excused," Abdiel replied. "Take your seat and we will begin." As he spoke, all the councilmen rose. The lights were turned down to give a more radiant ambiance. Abdiel took his seat in the middle of the table as light was fixated on the group of esteemed council members. I looked around at the size of the structure and the sheer number of people there, and I swallowed hard. It was intimidating to see something so crazy. The noise was deafening. Abdiel quieted the crowd as he made his way to a large, beautiful gold podium. "It is my esteemed pleasure to be the host of the Holy Light Guard Trials Cycle Gamma Delta 4110, he said with his arms raised. "It is a privilege and honor to host all you fine applicants." As he spoke, the crowd grew more and more enthusiastic. I stared around, still in awe of the whole spectacle. "I am Abdiel Ralphiel. To those of you who don't know, I am the headmaster of the Judah House and the head seat of the lower council. I am in charge of organizing and running this cycle's trial, along with my esteemed colleagues," he continued, pointing to the council members behind him. "What is the Judah House?" Eve whispered under her breath. Jade looked over to her, visually agitated before conceding. "It's one of the 12 schools I spoke of. The Heaven Banner Champion, to be specific. It, along with the House of Judah, are omitted from recruiting this cycle. Well, technically they have been omitted for the last 100 cycles, but the point is they are so successful that they don't need to. There isn't a recruit here who doesn't have them at the top of their list. The truth is, they'll be turning recruits away whether they are allowed to recruit or not," Jade explained cautiously, looking forward with every word he whispered. "Heaven Banner?" I asked, trying my best to keep looking forward. "That is too far ahead to explain fully. Just know it is an event that is held among the 12 schools throughout the school year," he replied, staring forward. "But enough. You guys need to pay attention." "Now allow me to introduce the rest of the lower council," he said with a smile as he turned to a man sitting in the first chair. "First, we have the head of the House of Benjamin, Regiel Uriel, and even though the Benjamin House has finished in the bottom 3 in the Heaven Banner Championship in the last 10 cycles, they do boast last year's Rookie of the Year in Marcus Drake. They also boast some of the most prestigious alumni, and have been graded an S-Class house for 95 out of the last 100 House League games. Brother Regiel has served in over 1,000 battalions, and has been awarded several awards for his service. He is credited with taking back over 100 cursed worlds, and has been recognized with the heaven-renowned E-Class Anointment Badge, given only to the most prestigious Light Guardsmen. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our newest headmaster, the head of the Benjamin House, Councilman Uriel." The crowd erupted as Abdiel finished his soliloquy. As he spoke, a man in a red and blue-trimmed priestly robe and a white gallon hat smiled and nodded appreciatively. He looked like a country hick. He had a thick mullet-style dark brown hairdo that hung over his shoulders. His fingers were adorned with beautiful gold rings. He was slightly portly and wore a thick mustache that hung from his face like a villain from my dad's old kung fu movies. Out of everyone I had seen since I arrived in the Heaven Realm, he had to be the goofiest. He struggled to his feet and prepped himself, nervously fumbling to organize his speech papers. He cleared his throat awkwardly and made his way to the podium. "This guy looks like a cowboy," Sam replied as the crowd quieted down. "Your skills of deduction are astounding, Sam," Eve poked. "No, I mean, he looks different from the rest of these people. Did he get old or something?" Sam continued. "My dad said that being old isn't seen the same way in the Heaven Realm. In this realm, some people see it as a sign of wisdom," Jacob answered. "So what? He wants to look like that?" I added. "No, well, I don't know about him, but most only choose to show their age at times where it is advantageous to their reputation. But in rare cases, now that I think about it, yeah, some do just prefer to look old, Jacob explained.
Shh, Jade warned, pointing toward the stage. What is it with you Earthborns? Pay attention!
His eyes twitched as he spoke. He had the same look he gave me the day Sam and I got into it. It still sent shivers up my spine. I quickly forced a relenting smile and stared forward intently. He shook his, over-dramatically exhausted, and turned his focus back toward the stage. Regiel cleared his throat again. He looked painfully out of place and uncomfortable. He smiled nervously and gripped the podium with both hands.
Thank you for that warm welcome, he replied, his voice cracking. I would like to say that the Benjamin House is open and willing to accept any recruit that is willing to work hard. Hell...
He backed away, visibly shaken. It was obvious his nerves were getting the best of him. He took a deep breath before gathering himself and walking back up to the podium.
Hell, I can't say whether or not you'll be able to join our little outfit. I reckon it'll take some doing on my part to try and steer some of you higher-class recruits to our house, but I gotta be honest. A leopard can't change his spots, and I can't be any way other than the way the good Father Yahweh made me. I might be a little country, and that may turn a few of you off, and I apologize to the sponsors for that, but I'm an earth-born southern boy. If that type of thing makes you not want to choose the Benjamin House, I can understand that. You have to do what your heart tells you. But to those of you who can look past my obvious earth-born accent and tendencies, I promise you won't find a more dedicated headmaster. They wanted me to come up here and give you young men some stuffy, well-pronounced speech, and I wish like heck that I could do that. But it ain't me. Every man who has dared to look past what I appeared to be hasn't regretted it, he pleaded, hanging his head. Thank you for your time.
My heart went out to the guy. As awkward as his speech was, it was genuine. I got a kind and honest vibe from him. He was trustworthy. Maybe it was his familiar accent, but he made me feel comfortable.
Man, that wasn't much of a speech,
Eve gushed, looking around for our feedback.
I don't know. I liked it, Beth responded.
Shh, Jade warned, still playing noise police. Meanwhile, you could hear a pin drop after Regiel finished his speech. Some of the prospects chuckled under their breath and rudely imitated his thick country accent as he made his way back to his seat. The crowd weathered the awkward silence before clapping on cue as Abdiel made his way back to the podium. Thank you, Brother Regiel, and I would hope that we have mature prospects that are smart enough not to judge a man without knowing him, he replied, staring sternly at one of the heckling recruits. The recruit looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. His group friends looked like they wanted to throw something at the kid as he lowered his head, embarrassed. Abdiel paused and turned toward Councilman Regiel with a sympathetic stare. As I said before, this is Headmaster Regiel's first year as the head of the Benjamin House, but I stood side by side with this man in many battles, and speaking as his best friend, I can promise you a recruit won't find a more earnest soul. I just wanted to give you recruits a chance to hear from him, seeing as it was his first year on the council, Abdiel explained, scratching the back of his neck subconsciously. But I digress. Moving on to the rest of our council. Next we have Ling Mailingiel. She is the headmistress of the Asher House. Mistress Mailingiel has been the catalyst behind the turnaround of the house in recent years. Recruiting a top 5 class in each of the last 5 cycles, she was a highly decorated guardsman and had close to 100 years of experience in the Asher House before being promoted to headmistress 5 years ago. The school has been on a steady incline ever since. Ladies and gentlemen, Mistress Mailingiel. She gracefully rose to her feet. She wore a priestly garment, much like the one Regiel wore. But unlike Regiel's, hers had a dark red trim in the spots his was blue. She was a beautiful woman with long black hair and light red eyes, unlike anything I'd ever seen on Earth. She smiled and waved before sitting back down. I was glad to see it. I thought I was going to have to hear a speech from each headmaster, and with my ADHD, it was going to be quite the challenge. I had a better chance of sleeping through the whole thing. He went on announcing and naming each of the various headmasters. They all wore colors that matched their school banners. They were well accomplished and looked every bit the part. The two schools that stuck out to me the most were obviously Abdiel of Judah House and Regiel. The guy from the House of Joseph was a tall, thin man with glasses that complemented his snooty look perfectly. His name was Saul Marcel. Apparently, he was some big shot like Regiel, but I had long lost interest, so nothing after the fifth headmaster stuck. I rocked back and forth, impatiently strumming my fingers on the table. "Tim, will you stop that?" Eve asked in an aggressive whisper. "Sorry," I replied, embarrassed by her sudden outburst, "but this is driving me crazy. I can't take much more of it." "It's almost done," Jade added, motioning for me to calm down. "He should be moving toward the trials soon. This is tradition, and you should have respect for it. These men have given much for the faith, and it would suit you well to remember that in this realm." Yeah, I can't help it, though," I groaned like a brat. As Jade finished, the podium in front of him descended into the stage. Abdiel stepped forward with his arms raised. The crowd erupted immediately. I surveyed the stadium, trying to understand what had amped the crowd up to such an extreme. Before I could get a bearing on what was going on, Abdiel cut in. "Now," he screamed, playing to the crowd, "are you ready for the Light Guard trials?" I couldn't fathom the gravity of the situation I was in. The legions around us cheered and celebrated as we looked around, dumbfounded. Abdiel paused as the crowd seemed to get louder with every passing second. The comparison was made between it and the Super Bowl, but experiencing this thing firsthand, there was nothing in our realm that compared. The energy of the crowd, the size of the stadium, and the priority given to the participants were like nothing the Earth realm had to offer. "I can't believe how crazy this is," Danielle complained. "You hear about it, but I never imagined it was this crazy." JDL nodded in agreement. "It's usually crazy, but this is crazier than I have ever seen it. Maybe it's you guys or the ABA Legion, but whatever it is, they are definitely more excited for this cycle's trials," he explained. Max leaned over, still cautiously trying not to speak too loud. "Well, of course, for the first time in cycles, we have more than one legion that is considered elite. And with you guys being outside the Alpha House, it is even crazier," he replied in a volume-controlled tone. "What? Why does it matter that we're not Alpha House?" Sai asked, covering her ears and forcefully raising her voice to be heard over the roar of the crowd. "I thought there was only one Alpha House per year anyway." "It's like I told you before. The average legion has maybe one or two elite prospects. The Alpha House is the only exception to that. And although they don't have as many elite prospects as you do, they do have a good number of them. This usually makes it impossible for the average legion to compete. And like in your realm, people root for the underdog. The Alpha House has been kicking the butts of every quadrant's best and brightest for cycles. And to a lot of people, this is a chance to see them finally get theirs," Max continued. He paused and pointed up, signaling for us to look up as the dome rescinded, revealing the beautiful sky of the heaven realm. Fireworks exploded in the dim evening sky. They were soaring like synchronized fighter jets. The colors were like the ones in the wormholes. It was stunning. "Awesome!" Sam exclaimed, pointing up at them. "Yeah, I've never seen so many beautiful colors," Eve seconded. One of the comet-like fireworks danced around, maneuvering in ways that defied physics. I powered up and zoomed in to get a better look at it. I was surprised to see that the light wasn't a firework at all. It was a man. I couldn't believe my eyes. He wasn't the fastest thing I had ever seen, but he was flying. He shot straight up in the air before pausing and shooting himself toward the stage. Some of the legions screamed, presuming the fireworks had gone awry. "Oh my gosh," Beth let out. "One of those fireworks is going to hit the stage." I smiled, composed, as the legions around us rose, anticipating a disaster. "It's not a firework, it's a man," I replied confidently. "How can you tell?" Pete asked, shielding his eyes to get a better look. "I got supervision courtesy of Ms. Hikari," I replied, pointing at Sai with a gun-like finger-thumb combo. "Tim, power down," Max ordered abruptly. "It is forbidden to power up here before the trials begin." His words were so sudden I almost swallowed my tongue. I coughed loudly as my saliva went down the wrong pipe. I tried to keep my choking low, but it was useless. I helplessly riffed like a corn seed in the microwave. Sorry. How was I supposed to know? I replied through the coughs. Sai smacked me on the back in an attempt to help me recompose myself. My eyes watered as I bent over, finally able to breathe without restriction. I grunted, clearing my throat as the rest of the Legion laughed at my expense. "Come on, Max, you almost gave the kid a heart attack," Luke joked. "You okay, Tim?" Eve questioned, snickering as she alternated from patting and rubbing my back. "Yeah, he made me feel like someone was going to shoot me down or something," I exclaimed, wiping my eyes. "Don't be dramatic," he replied. "You didn't use enough of your power for them to sense you, but had anyone gotten a glimpse of your eyes, you could have been disqualified. It's highly unlikely, but it's bad press we don't need so early in the trials." The man landed on the stage with a thunderous explosion, cutting our conversation short. A firework display the size of a building extended from the spot he landed and stretched out over the crowd in the shape of a hawk. The hawk appeared to be perched as a wave seemed to come from behind it. The wave was in the shape of a dragon. It flew into the air. It was the spitting image of a dragon, down to the scales. Everything about it looked real. It burst like a water balloon, fell down like rain. We watched as the rain stopped just above our heads and turned into small clusters of butterflies that fluttered through the dining hall. Just as suddenly as it all appeared, the elements rescinded toward the man, revealing him clearly for the first time before bursting into vapor. The rest of the stadium erupted as the man stood with his arms raised. "That was the most amazing show I've ever seen," Sai gushed, clapping exuberantly. "Try getting that at Disney World. Man, awesome!" Eve nudged me playfully with a laugh. "It would have been better if Tim hadn't ruined it for everyone," she shot flippantly. I shrugged my shoulders, apologetically smiling. "Come on, I had no idea it was a part of the show," I replied. "Exactly. That's why you keep your mouth shut," Jacob added. I glared at him angrily before relenting. Shut up, Jacob," I responded, shrugging him off with a wave of my hand. Eve smiled apologetically. She made a sarcastically squeamish expression as she mouthed, "I'm sorry." I returned the smile and signaled that it was all right. "Shh, they're about to begin," Jade responded, signaling for us to stand. It wasn't until then that I noticed we were the only people in the entire place still sitting. We all scrambled to our feet. The performing man was standing, soaking up the applause before bowing like a maestro. The crowd was deafening. I cringed from the sheer pain of the echo. "Ladies and gentlemen, Marvelous Marco Michaels!" Abdiel exclaimed, pointing at the man. "Marco's show is renowned for its subatomic artistry. He was named Arch Press Weekly's top performer for the Judah Alpha Epsilon Gamma cycle. He is one of the biggest stage acts in the Heaven Realm. He will be performing in the Entertainment District, Quadrant Alpha 1874 in Vegas City. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, Marvelous Marco Michaels." He was a thinly built man with long curly hair. He wore a green suit that looked a lot like a ninja gi on the bottom with a long-sleeve spandex shirt. There was an emblem in the middle of his chest in the shape of the hawk and dragon he used in his show. He humbly smiled before blowing kisses and bowing once more. He leaned back and blew dueling dragons made of fire and water into the air. They flew over the dining hall before going up to the upper deck where all the fans were. They retreated and headed toward the man full speed. It was amazing. It reminded me of a 3D laser light show. The dragons headed straight for Marco full speed and exploded as fireworks shot through the air in rapid succession. The crowd erupted in cheers as they exploded in the air, high above the stadium. "What a show!" said one of the legions next to us. The explosion slowly died as one last shot went high in the air like a flare and exploded into the shape of a hawk. It streamed for Marco, going for speed. I watched excitedly as the light smashed into the stage, letting out an explosion that drew enthusiasm from the crowd once again. When the smoke dissipated, Marco was nowhere to be found. Abdiel leaned back smiling as he applauded and grinned from ear to ear. "Ladies and gentlemen, once again, marvelous Marco Michaels!" he exclaimed exuberantly. We all remained standing, clapping as the crowd was going crazy. "Thank you, my brothers and sisters. You may be seated," he replied, motioning for us to sit down. There were faint grumbles, combined with chairs and feet steps sounding off all around us as we took our seats. The atmosphere around the hall was stern. You could hear a pin drop as Abdiel started. "As I said before, this is the Light Guard trials," he replied in a stern, grunty voice. "And it is a prestigious tournament that has been held for more years than you can fathom. You legions have all exhibited extraordinary talents to make it this far. Only the most prestigious of trial legions can make the claim that they have sat in these halls. This privilege should not be taken lightly." I looked around at the competition, and I couldn't help but feel intimidated. Jade and the rest of our hosts pounded us with the realization of what we were about to face, but I had no idea the legions would be so big. They all looked like they were at least teenagers, and not the regular run-of-the-mill teenagers. These guys looked mean. I sat up in an attempt to make myself look more menacing, but even with me sitting on my hands, my head barely peeked over the back of my chair. "Tim, will you sit still? You're like a 5-year-old, Jacob snapped. "Pay attention." I cut him a dirty look before facing forward. "In this competition, legions have the privilege of representing their heritage in front of the entire heaven realm," Abdiel continued. "Unfortunately, it won't be a privilege given to all of you." Faint whispering erupted as he finished his sentence. "Jade, I thought you said there was a chance every legion could make it," Sam whispered under his breath. "Shh," Jade responded, cautiously pointing toward the stage. "As most of you know, there will only be 12 legions allowed to compete in this year's televised competition. Now don't be discouraged, because that in no way means that the other legions will not be able to compete in this year's trials. It just means that we can't afford to televise over 100 legion showdowns. Now, the legions who make the secondary cuts will be televised in the native quadrant of each trial legion member, just not universally." I looked around. The tension in the room was thick. You could cut it with a knife. I looked over and caught the eye of a female from a different species sitting at a table next to ours. She had long bluish brunette hair. It was elegantly pulled back into a ponytail. Her skin was a beautiful light gray. It was similar to a whale's skin, but humanoid. She was gorgeous. She tapped her feet, nervously biting her nails. She looked around before catching my gaze. "Excuse me," she mouthed, composing herself as best as she could. I shook my head, motioning that it was no big deal. She smiled bashfully as her gaze drifted back to the stage. "Before I announce who the 12 trial legions are, I will explain the rules," he added. I know a lot of you don't want to hear this because you feel this is old hat, but this year we felt it would be appropriate considering we have a legion which is new to the heaven realm. It seemed like every eye in the stadium immediately locked onto us. We all alternated between awkward coughs and wondering eyes until the initial interest waned. Gee, I wonder who they're talking about, I joked sarcastically. JDL motioned for me to be quiet once again. I ignored him and stared forward as Abdiel continued. As you all know, the light trials are taken in 3 parts: the evaluation, the undertaking, and the duel, he explained. He continued for the next couple minutes with me going in and out. I felt like a hamster in a matchbox. It was like I was at one of my dad's boring banquets, and I was finding it extremely hard to stay focused. I leaned back as Abdiel continued to go through every painfully boring aspect of the trials. I couldn't care less. Jade and Max had already explained all the parts I needed to know. Everything else was white noise to me, and it was becoming obvious to everyone around me that I wasn't interested. For the first time since I arrived in the heaven realm, I wanted to go home. I covertly jostled around in my chair, unable to sit still. It was driving me crazy. I felt like I was going to explode when he finally finished. Now that the rules have been rehashed, we can move toward the reason why you are all here, he responded with a smirk. He stepped out from behind the podium and took a couple steps back. A light shined from above our heads. It looked as if it was being shot down from the top of the stadium. I jostled around to get a look at it, but from our vantage point, I couldn't see a thing.
Here we go,
Zek exclaimed, rubbing his hands together.
Yep, here we go,
Joe seconded, bouncing in his chair. The light danced around the stage before settling on the podium. The podium descended into the stage as the light began to transform. It morphed and changed until it was in the shape of a giant scoreboard. It had angelic writing all over it, with knobs and tickers that gave it the appearance of a calculator.
What is that thing?
Pete asked, turning to the twins.
It's the big board,
Joe responded.
It's how they announce the legions.
As Joe spoke, Abdiel made his way to the front of the large board like a contest host, appeasing the rabid crowd. Now I will announce the matchups for this cycle's trials. Once the legions are called, you must rise and make your way to the stage. Once you are finished here, you will head directly out those twin doors located directly behind you. Once you're there, you will be advised on what you will do from there, he replied, cracking his knuckles. His eyes lit up as he mashed buttons on his watch. His watch seemed to ignite in a bright red flame before returning to its previous form. The people have spoken, he declared with his eyes returning to their normal form. The crowd erupted in excitement, anticipating his next words. What was that fire? The one on his arm, I replied, turning to Jade. He looked back, still clapping. It's a consensus BAU, he replied, speaking to me peripherally. It is the collective tally of all the thoughts of every being in the heaven realm. That consensus gets compiled with the lower council's vote and tallied up. It's a very thorough procedure. Even you guys cast a vote. Wait, what? Sam replied, confused. That is the way it is done here in the heaven realm. No vote is conscious. It is the choice of the spirit. They take a reading of your subconscious thoughts, feelings, and convictions, and a vote is tallied, he continued. It is instantaneous and extremely effective when dealing with this sort of thing. It was one of the reasons the Light Guard trials are so popular. Sam nodded before turning back toward the stage. Now, the first matchup in the Gamma Delta 4110 cycle will be, he said, pausing for effect, Legion Gamma Nu Beta from Quadrant Pi Theta Gamma Pi Lambda. As he spoke, a table a few rows down from us erupted. What I presumed to be their home quadrant fans were seated in a section right above them. They bounced up and down, hugging each other as the group made their way to the stage. As they spoke, one of the screens on the scoreboard cut to a newscast that was similar to a sport broadcast from the Earth realm. A man's face appeared on a screen high above the big board. He was dolled up in a suit as he sat at a news desk. "Congratulations to Legion Gamma Nu Beta," Abdiel replied. "Their trial acceptance will be accepted by their Meta-Quadrant Mayor Alders Dumel." As he spoke, Mayor Dumel smiled, acknowledging him. "It is an esteemed honor to congratulate the 5th selected Trial Legion from our humble little sector," he said, smiling from ear to ear. "I know you will do our Meta-Quadrant proud. We will be rooting for you in the upcoming trials." The group smiled and waved as they made their way across the stage. They greeted each counselor with a hug and a handshake before heading back down the steps and out the door. "Another round of applause for Legion Gamma Nu Beta," he replied with his hand extended in their direction. "Now, their matchup will be Legion Lambda Nu Zeta." Once again, the place went nuts. I watched impatiently as they went through the formulaic routine. Legion after legion was called as we sat, wondering if we would make it. What if something went wrong? I thought, doubt slowly creeping in as yet another legion was called. I sat on pins and needles as the last matchup was called. It had to be us. There was no way it wouldn't be. They wouldn't have made such a big deal if it wasn't a sure thing, I thought, reassuring myself. "They are going to call us, aren't they?" Luke added. It seemed I wasn't the only one having doubts. "I don't know," Max replied, surprising us all. "What?" I exclaimed in disbelief. "What do you mean you don't know?" "Like I said, I don't know," Max replied. "We told you guys everything you need to know about the trials. You did everything to be eligible for consideration. But you heard Abdiel. You won't get preferential treatment. All this excitement surrounding you guys means nothing. The only opinions that matter are the people watching, and those 12 men on the stage. Besides, this is just the universally televised matches." "But I thought that you said that the people wanted to see us," Sam replied. "They do. They decide the matchups and what goes on television, not who makes the trials in general. That is left up to the council. But that being said, you guys are the most popular Legion here. And although you may lack in a lot of areas experience-wise, if you do make it, it will be surprising if you're not one of the televised battles based on that alone," he replied. "Thanks, Max. You're going to make us blush," Sai added sarcastically. "You seemed almost overwhelmed by our talent." "I'm just preparing you," he responded, shrugging off Sai's dig. "But seriously, now is not the time to talk about this." My heart started to beat a mile a minute as Abdiel prepared to announce the first of the last televised team. With all the fanfare we were getting, it would be incredibly embarrassing to not even make it as one of the televised units. It was vain, but I didn't feel like being teased the rest of the night. These guys already hated our guts. If we got snubbed, it would probably make their day to find a way to shove it in our faces. Not to mention, my mind was doing the math, and the deductions I was landing on had me on pins and needles. It was a simple deduction to anyone thinking about it logically. The truth was, if they didn't want us for TV, we would be hard-pressed to make it all. "The first name in the final matchup of the universally televised Gamma Delta 4110 cycle is," Abdiel continued, baiting the crowd. I leaned forward on pins and needles. Abdiel paused with a playfully mischievous smile. I rocked back and forth, impatiently strumming my fingers on the tabletop. I looked around, and it seemed we weren't the only Legion who believed this was our last chance. It was written all over the faces of every aspiring Legion in attendance. We were tuned in like our lives depended on it. "The first Legion in the final matchup will be Legion Alpha Beta Alpha," he responded to an eruption from the crowd. I covered my ears. It was a madhouse at that point. The Legion leaped up and down as they made their way to the stage. I initially couldn't see them. They were covered by the standing legions in front of us. As they made their way to the stage, I froze. I couldn't believe it. "You have got to be kidding me," I said, staring at the stage in disbelief. "What?" Pete asked, leaning around Sai as he spoke. I just met that guy in the front. He's from Angel Haven. I met him in the hall on my way to the elevator," I responded. Sai turned to me with an excited and epiphany-laden expression. "You're right, that's Sean McMillian," she blurted, catching me off guard. "He was in our class when we were younger." I stared at her, furrowing my brow. "How do you know that?" I replied. Jacob turned to me, shaking his head with a drained expression. "Because unlike you, Tim, the rest of us pay attention to the things that go on around us," he replied flippantly. "That kid and his family are known throughout Angel Haven. How often does something like that happen to a family in our town?" He was right. I was the only person in existence that could totally ignore something that important, but Jacob still annoyed me to no end. I stood, shaking my head objectively as Eve chimed in. "Hey, wait, McMillian, as in the crazy good super recruit McMillian? Alpha Beta Alpha, the guy Abdiel and that reporter lady were gushing over?" she said, turning to Max. "No, his name is Sean," I replied confidently. "That other guy's name was Paul. It's probably just a coincidence, or maybe he has a light-born brother, I don't know. But I know his name is Sean. He told me his name when we spoke." Pete's eyes perked up. He snapped his fingers, gesturing that something had just occurred to him before speaking. "Paul McMillan, that's why it sounded so familiar when I initially heard it," he spouted. "That was the dad's name." "What, Dad?" Sam replied. "This was about 4 or 5 years before you moved to Angel Haven, Sam. There was a brutal slaying involving a family. His family," Sai replied, pointing at Sean. "Pete's right. I guess with all the commotion since we arrived, I just dismissed it. But you're right. Paul and Annie McMillan were the names of the parents." "Wait, so this guy is in a legion with his dad?" Luke responded. "No," replied Max, turning to us annoyed. "His name is Paul McMillan. Paul Sean McMillan Jr. He's got the same name as his father. Isn't that a common practice in your realm?" And boom goes the dynamite, Sai stabbed, pointing at Luke. "What? I never..." he laughed, without ever finishing his sentence. "Well, yeah, I guess that explains it," Eve replied with a laugh. I thought of the talk we had in the hallway. Sean was such a down-to-earth guy. I would have never guessed he was the Uber recruit everyone was talking about. A part of me was glad. It took some of the mystique surrounding their legion away. It gave them a face, and to boot, he was the same age as me. He had more experience, but that was always a factor. At least for the time being, our biggest challenge wasn't a mystery. "So, you talked to this guy, little Eli?" Uriah added. "Yes, on my way to the elevator," I replied. "What did he say?" Sam asked. Every eye at our table was glued on me. "Nothing, really. He just told me a little about the Heaven Realm. He just explained what happened to his family and said he'd meet me during the celebration," I replied, wishing I had more to say. "What did he tell you about what happened to him and his family?" Eve probed. "I don't know. He said something about it being pretty bad, but he didn't really get into any of the details," I replied apologetically. "And I didn't feel like I knew him well enough to pry." Jade turned to me with a stern look before pointing to the stage. I shrugged and pointed around the table in protest. "They're asking me questions," I countered, protesting. "It's not my fault." "I don't care," Jade replied. "Pay attention." I missed the old pushover Jade. This new guy was starting to get under my skin. I plopped in my seat, childishly crossing my arms, angrily staring forward. Sean and his legion bowed to the crowd after greeting all the councilmen. As they did, a man appeared on the video screen to accept their invitation. Once again, it is the Alpha House's esteemed pleasure to accept this most prestigious of honors. We respect this competition and will do our best to give our awesome fans an entertaining trial. Best of luck to whomever our opponents are, and we hope for a fair and competitive trial, said the man. He had light, almost white blonde hair and wore horn-tipped glasses. He sat at a big fancy desk with awards and statues all around him. He wore an arrogant smile that irked me in a way that I couldn't explain. Congratulations to the Alpha Beta Alpha Legion, and I'll see you guys after the opening ceremonies, he continued before the screen went black. Keel Landon, ladies and gentlemen, Abdiel responded as the crowd clapped once more. Okay, Alpha Beta Alpha Legion, head right out the double doors. I stood motionless as they made their way down the corridor. Sean smiled as he passed before catching a glimpse of me. He nodded in my direction. I returned his nod with a nod of my own. Congratulations, I replied as he walked past me. Thanks, Tim, and good luck, he replied. I acknowledged his statement with a smile and another nod before turning back toward the front. I tried desperately to ignore the gazes of everyone at my table, but their stares were like red beams pointed at my head. What? I replied, looking around, annoyed by the attention. Nothing, they all replied at various times before turning back to the front. The famous Timothy Eli, Eve replied, getting a last-minute dig in. Can't even walk to the elevator without running into a fan. Ha ha, I replied sarcastically. Give me a break. She smiled lightheartedly and turned her gaze to the stage. Abdiel took a hesitant, baiting breath and proceeded. Now, the last legion I call will proceed just like the others before them. All the other legions will remain, and we will proceed with the remaining regional quadrant trials, he instructed. As I said before, there is absolutely no difference between your trials and the trials that are televised. It's simply a way to get the best and brightest legions the exposure they need. There are a lot of sponsors who pay handsomely for promotion, and we have to put out the best product available. But this in no way determines the career you will have in the Light Guard Academy. You may not have the ability to showcase your skills to the extent that the televised legion will, but you will be afforded every opportunity they will. I was growing more and more impatient with every word he spoke. I wanted to scream as he dragged the announcement on longer and longer. The crowd was as annoyed as I was, and they weren't shy about showing it. They huffed and moaned throughout his entire speech. Okay, without further ado, he continued, quieting the crowd with a wave of his hand. The final legion in the upcoming Light Guard trials will be... He paused, looking around the mountainous stadium with a mischievous smile. I leaned forward, helplessly hanging on to every word. The crowd groaned once more as he chuckled, playing them like a cello. Okay, I couldn't resist, he said, apologetically relenting. The final legion and combatant of the Alpha Beta Alpha Legion will be... Legion Theta Delta! The crowd thundered as our name was called. I thought their cheers were loud before, but after hearing them at the sound of our name, the previous ovation was tame in comparison. It was ridiculous. We all looked at each other uncomfortably. We rose, alternating between smiles and unconfident looks as we made our way down the aisle. The other legions patted us on the back and shook our hands as we made our way to the stage. Did I miss something? Eve joked. Yeah, I thought these guys hated us, Sam added. You don't know how long the Heaven Realm has been waiting for this matchup. Whether they hate us or they hate them, they want to see us tear each other apart, Danielle explained. I made my way up the stairs, praying I didn't trip. I painted a fake smile on my face and greeted each of the councilmen. As I made my way to Abdiel, he wore a grin that eased me. I bashfully shook his hands as he looked me in the eye. He stopped me as Jacob approached and turned to speak with us. "It is an honor to meet you, young men," he replied, signaling for Regiel to come over. "This man was your mother's professor when she came through the Judah house. She was a fabulous Legion captain and is one of our most illustrious alumni." Regiel smiled as he waddled across the stage. "Hi there, boys," he said, chuckling with a country flair. "Jacob, if you're not the spitting image of your daddy. And Tim, boy, you got more courage than an armadillo on a busy highway. Not many people would have taken up a task like that, but knowing your mother, I'll just say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." We both thanked him in chorus as he chuckled aloud again. "But I'm sure you boys have wasted enough time in this dog and pony show. I won't keep you. I just had to meet you boys, though. Good luck, and I'll see you guys at the end of the trials," he replied as we shook his hand. We nodded in appreciation as we made our way over and joined the rest of our legion. The crowd was still thunderously loud. Abdiel made his way to the center of the stage and quieted them with arms extended. "We have a special treat for those in attendance," he replied, turning to the video screen on the scoreboard. "Giving the acceptance speech for the Theta Delta Legion will be the Archangel Michael!" The crowd exploded once again as Michael appeared on the screen. The legions were more ecstatic than the fans were as they tapped each other, pointing at the screen in disbelief. I couldn't fathom it. Was Michael really that famous in the heaven realm? "All this for Michael?" Luke added sarcastically. Jade chuckled at Luke's words. "It is extremely rare for anyone from the higher heaven guards or realms to make an appearance. The light guard trials are an exception, of course, but for the most part, these people will hear from someone like Michael once every 400 or 500 years." "Lucky them," Eve cracked as Michael began. "Thank you," Michael replied, waiting for the crowd to die down. "Congratulations to the Theta Delta Legion. You guys have great potential, and I have no doubt that you will become an excellent Legion. Remember what I told you. Have faith in Father Yahweh and the faith He has in you. And the same goes to all you other legions out there. Remember, your power comes from Father Yahweh, and may He bless you. Enjoy your time at the trials. It is one of the most memorable times of my life. Thank you, and have an unforgettable time." The crowd clapped as the screen darkened. "Thank you, Michael," Abdiel said, walking to the front of the stage. "And once again, Legion Theta Delta!" As he spoke, he motioned for us to make our exit. We made our way back down the steps and toward the double doors. The legions once again congratulated us as we made our exit. I felt so undeserving of the reception. I still felt like the rug was about to be pulled out from under me. I was a mess as I forced a smile. I couldn't remember ever being this nervous about anything in my life. I was sweating bullets from the hype heaped on us. I couldn't imagine what I would do when the trials actually began.